Hello, and welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. My guest today is no stranger to Radnor Studio 21 or to 30 Minutes. He's been a guest before. Lieutenant Andy Block, welcome back to 30 Minutes. I appreciate your being here again.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here once again.
When we last visited, we were talking about, at the time, burglaries and theft during the holiday season and some of the things that unsuspecting, trusting people might do. To create some defenses against being robbed or cars being broken into, and you took us through a litany of things that, really stupid things that people do.
Unfortunately.
Because we're so trusting.
Sure.
So we've all got to learn to be more defensive in just another aspect of our lives. Today, we're going to talk about another problem that is becoming, if not epidemic in this country. It certainly seems to be reaching that level, and that's drugs, the use of illicit and prescription drugs in particular. And if you would please help us understand what's going on in Radnor Township with regard to the use or abuse of illicit drugs and prescription drugs in particular, and what trends you see developing in this community. And I realize that this has really no boundaries, that we are talking, and you represent Radnor Township, but it is a regional problem and a national problem.
It affects the region, especially when the region is supported by a major metropolitan city such as Philadelphia.
Let's start with a couple of definitions. What is an illicit drug? I know what a prescription drug is, but what's an illicit drug?
An illicit drug is any type of drug that is manufactured outside of a drug manufacturer's lab, a pharmaceutical lab. So if you take a situation such as crystal meth or methamphetamine, that could be considered an illicit drug because it's not manufactured or controlled by the government, the DEA, and it's made essentially in someone's kitchen. So we don't know what the makeup is, so it makes it illicit at that point. It's a drug, and a drug is, the definition of a drug is anything that can alter the mind or the physical aspect of one's body is the general definition of a drug.
And there are only two categories of drugs, whether it is the illicit drugs as you describe them and prescription drugs?
Well, there's several different categories, but that's what we speak about. There are prescription drugs, which are regulated by the Drug Enforcement Administration, your local physician, and then there are illegal drugs that, such as heroin and whatnot, and cocaine that are sold on the street that may have medical properties or medical applications. However, they're not being used currently by the Medical Association or physicians and recognized by the DEA. We get into different schedules of our drugs, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, and the schedules determine what medical use they may have and what's practical in this day and age. So there's several different categories of drugs itself. And then you get into your depressants, your stimulants, antidepressants. So there's a multitude of areas.
Explain to us Radnor Township Police's capabilities to deal with drug issues in the township. Is there a drug unit within the Radnor Township Police, or do you rely on other resources for enforcement particularly?
The Radnor Township Police Department participates in the Delaware County Drug Task Force. So we have officers that are assigned, in addition to their regular duties here in Radnor, they also work hand in hand with the Drug Task Force, which is administered through the Delaware County District Attorney's Office. So those officers will conduct investigations from time to time, sometimes maybe within the township, other times not, in other jurisdictions within Delaware County, and vice versa. We have other officers that will come in and assist us and aid us in drug investigations. So we're very active and proactive with respect to that enforcement area on the apprehending the people that may be selling drugs or using drugs, the illicit drugs.
Can you describe for us today the current, how prevalent is the use and abuse of illicit drugs and prescription drugs, and within which age brackets?
The concern that we see that, and it can, in the region, it starts down sometimes even in the middle school with respect to the prescription drugs. Some of this is really an epidemic proportion, simply because if you go into any household in the United States, chances are you'll be able to find some type of prescription medication in the medicine cabinet. Specifically, what concerns law enforcement, the DEA, and society in general are the narcotic prescriptions that are in there. They're prescribed by a doctor. Usually there's some type of procedure that a person may have gone through, or they're having been prescribed for pain management, they're not used in their entirety. They remain in the cabinet. Well, it's readily accessible to anybody else that may want to come in and take those pills and use them. And there are superstitions with those as well, because people feel, well, it's a prescription, it cannot hurt me.
Right.
And that's a falsehood, because unfortunately we continue to see unintentional overdoses from ingesting or taking these types of prescriptions. And it was just recently in the Inquirer, an article, I believe it was the January 20th, the Sunday edition, where they spoke about the region. A physician down at the University of Pennsylvania spoke about how the unintentional overdoses are on the rise due to the availability of prescription medications, specifically narcotics or the opiates that are readily available.
Principally
Oxycontin,
among young people?
all different types of ages,
Yeah.
and again, across social and economic boundaries. It doesn't know any one specific culture. But the concern is there with the opiates, the narcotics, specifically the Vicodin and the Oxycontin. So the history of the pathology, what happens here is somebody may start taking these for recreational use in conjunction with alcohol. It comes to a point where it becomes cost prohibitive, or they are not able to obtain those pills anymore simply because it was a prescription. Narcotics cannot be refilled. It's a one-time prescription. If you need it, you're required to go back to the physician that issued it. They reevaluate you, and then they determine whether or not it has to be issued. So what happens is, what we tend to see in the region is if they can no longer get the prescription medications, they will now start turning to some of the illicit drugs. The DEA, as well as the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office, their Bureau of Narcotics Investigation, they release usually on a bi-weekly basis the different types of narcotics that we're seeing that are being sold illegally in the field or in the region, and some of the prices will floor you on what they get. And I'll use the Oxycontin pill, Oxy 80. It's the one pill is 80 milligrams.
Yes.
And it can have a street value when it's sold illegally anywhere between $40 and $70 per pill.
Ooh.
$40 to $70 per pill. So it becomes very cost prohibitive for the person that's trying to buy it. It's a lot of money. And this can also have an effect on our crime rate, which we spoke about in our previous segment.
Yes.
So what we see here is when they're no longer able to get the prescription medication, or they do not resort to committing some type of crime to be able to afford their habit, they switch to heroin. And Philadelphia is one of the heroin hubs on the East Coast. And this is very concerning simply because within a matter of 45 minutes, a person can be from the region in the suburban area down to Philadelphia, specifically in North Philadelphia. They can go to any street corner, buy a packet or a bundle of heroin, and they'll be back in their town or their home with, like I said, within 45 minutes, and they'll start using it. The dangers with heroin, again, is it's manufactured. It's not prescribed or manufactured in a pharmaceutical lab. It's brought in usually from South America or the Far East. The concentration levels are very dangerous. So we don't even know what type of concentration there is. Sometimes it could be, the purity levels could be, 50, 60, 70%. So this is the pathology we see with respect to the drug trends in the region. And it's very concerning. The average price of a packet or a bundle of heroin may be $100, and it may give you 10 to 15 packets depending on who is supplying it. And they are stamped. When we do have encounters with people that were either ingesting it or they were using it or they're arrested with it, there's a stamp on it, and the stamp is basically the dealer. So what happens is one stamp might be, I'll use the Fred Flintstone, a picture of Fred Flintstone, and if that's the good heroin for the week or the month, everybody's going to the corner where they can pick up Fred Flintstone, or they may go to another corner where it's Dinosaur. So it has a very, very intricate way that it's worked in the city coming out to the suburbs.
I know the whole thing is irrational, but they take such a risk. They don't know what's in that packet.
Exactly.
They have no idea what's in that packet.
And that's our concern. And what happens is, the first time that they use a prescription narcotic, or even if they're the first time they're using the heroin, they're never going to really achieve that initial high. And what happens, it's a slang term that's called, it's chasing the dragon. They're consistently trying to get that high back again, and each time they have to take more and more of the product, whether it be the prescription or the heroin.
And of course, the dealer is managing the dosage and what's in there.
Absolutely.
To hook and then keep
them coming back. Right. Exactly. The first couple of times that they may go down to to the city or wherever they may be getting their heroin from. It may actually be on the house, simply because that's going to bring them back.
Yep.
It's the introduction into it. And we see in the suburban communities in the region, the kids that may be getting involved in this,
Yes.
you know, in the high school and even the college kids or people in their 20s and 30s, they're educated. They know that needles are dirty. They know that needles will have disease, that they could end up getting hepatitis or HIV. So they're introducing it into the body in different ways. They may smoke it and they may ingest it. So they're not taking that risk of using the needles. The hardcore abusers are the ones that will revert to that simply because it's an immediate high once it goes in the main vein.
It's so sad, so destructive, not only for the individual, but for the family, and then, of course, ultimately society. The old impression was of someone in an overcoat, probably representing a mob or something, standing outside of a school building, trying to peddle. Is that not the case?
We don't see that anymore.
Sophisticated now?
It's a very sophisticated business. It's a supply and demand situation. And what you just referred to, the government became very concerned about that, and that's why anything that occurs within 1,000 feet of a school, the penalties are doubled or tripled depending on what type of drug activity it may be, simply because it's not being tolerated. They don't want it around the schools. So, but it has become a very sophisticated business, unfortunately. And on the legal end of it, because the pharmaceutical companies will lobby the lawmakers in Washington to continue to have lucrative drug plans that are extended to our citizens. They use it, they go see their doctor, but the concern that the DEA has, and I took one of the courses when I was in the FBI Academy last summer, is that regulating the pills that are put out there. We don't see it too much in this area, but you get down into the southern states such as Florida, Tennessee, they have pill mills where there are doctors that will just set up a clinic and there'll be lines coming out the door. People will come in and say, my back hurts, my leg hurts, and they're writing prescriptions for the narcotics.
They just put one of them away, didn't they, here in
the DEA did a raid on a office down in Hartford Township, right on Lancaster Avenue. That's still an ongoing investigation, but that's what they suspected, that they were dealing different narcotics out of those locations.
Do you or does the department have an official position on the legalization of marijuana?
The department doesn't have an official position on it. Our position is that it's illegal.
Yes.
And it's noted in the crimes code that it is illegal to possess or use it. I have colleagues out on the West Coast that deal with in California and the state of Washington where it is legalized, and it's very difficult to enforce and administer the legalized program because you get into medical cards, who can have it, who cannot, the different amounts. So it's a difficult situation to try to regulate it if it were to be made legal.
But I saw a television program quite recently about what's going on the West Coast in Washington, and the increasing incidence of traffic violations, traffic accidents, death by vehicle, because these people are high, and there's no way to control it.
And that's the concern. We see that. We've seen an uptick in the DUIs in the region here. It's alcohol, but now we're seeing more with marijuana, where we're stopping people where they're actively smoking it while they're operating a motor vehicle. And the same laws apply, the same penalties apply. You're driving under the influence of alcohol and or a controlled substance, which is very concerning.
Lieutenant, if you had a young person sitting across this desk who was suspected of smoking marijuana, what would you say to him or her? Would you try to scare the devil out of them, or would you take a more rational approach?
I think you need to have a rational approach initially. You need to talk to them, explain to them what they're doing to their body, for the immediate effects that it can harm them, and it also affects them socially down the road. It can affect anybody with respect to their career path. Alcohol used to be considered, marijuana used to be considered the gateway to drugs. It's no longer considered that. Alcohol is. So we see people that start drinking and then they use marijuana for recreational use, and then it continues to graduate. Not all the time, but we explain to the people through our prevention programs that this can affect you down the road with respect to your career paths, colleges, things of that nature.
But young people don't have that ability to see into the future or much care about the future.
Well, we use it this way simply because of social media. In this day and age, is every day our students are are on social media.
Yes.
Some aspect of it. We've even had situations where they have been at a party and there are either videos or photographs posted of people using illicit drugs, such as smoking marijuana or consuming alcoholic beverages, being under the age of 21. And we explain to them, all right, that's indelible. It's there. That mark has been made now. And that will go no matter where you are. It can follow you. And unfortunately, we see it even in law enforcement when we're doing background checks, where somebody might want to become a law enforcement officer, a police officer. We do the background checks. We check their social media pages, and there's been incriminating photos similar to that. And that just takes them right out of the game.
Yeah.
There's no way that we would consider hiring them in those situations, because it affects their credibility. And how can they go out there and enforce the law and arrest people for doing something they did?
If a parent suspects that, or is concerned that a child is exposed to or might be involved in drugs, what are some of the things a parent should watch for?
They should look for situations where their child may disengage from the family unit, a change in behavior, isolation, or that they've found new friends, or they're communicating online with different people that mom and dad, the parents, aren't aware of. They're the situations we see, and it's usually, sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's drastic. But it's usually, it becomes the isolation where they're isolated, they don't want to participate with the family anymore, and they're going their own way, they stray, is what we say from the family. If a parent suspects this, obviously try to have a conversation with your son or daughter on it. They may not want to have the open dialogue, but try that. But also through the schools. The schools in this area are excellent. They have drug and alcohol counselors in the schools, as well as the school administrators and teachers. So if it's suspected, mom or dad should have a dialogue with the school too. And a lot of times that doesn't happen because parents are embarrassed. They feel that they may have failed their son or their daughter or their family unit. And that's not the case. The case here is to, if there is a situation going on with the illegal drugs, drinking, things of that nature, it can't be controlled, that we want to get the help for the individual.
It must be even more stressful today because you've got young adults beyond the age of 21 who are coming back to live with their parents because they can't get a job. And if those young people are engaged in drugs, the parents have really no control over them because they're of age. All they can do is kick them out or report them to the police.
Correct, and that's not too likely a scenario. Most parents are not calling the police on their son or daughter. It does happen, though, from time to time. We have been called to investigate those types of situations. It's very sad, but there it's being more proactive in trying to support them to get away from the habit itself. And we see it too often. That's the sad part because, again, it comes back to the prescription medications being readily available to anybody. And we talk about, even on our college campuses, we see situations where the workload that the students are carrying, they're looking for some type of stimulant or the ADHD medications. They're out there and they're being sold back and forth too because somebody's looking for the stimulant to be able to stay up and do the power studying for 15 or 20 hours.
So what is a parent to do with prescription drugs? Lock them up?
They should use what they need to use with it, and when it's done, there is always the prescription drug take back. It's usually sponsored 2 to 3 times a year. Radnor Township always participates in it, and it'll usually be on a Saturday where you can bring down any type of prescription drug that you have. You just turn it over to the police. We package it up, and at the end of the day, the DEA comes out and takes it, and they destroy them. We don't recommend that you pour them down the drain or put them in the toilet simply because it contaminates our water supply and the ecosystem. So in those situations, if they're not using those prescriptions, to get them out of the house.
But if I am using the prescriptions on an ongoing basis, should I be locking them up?
If it's a narcotic, absolutely. It should be secured. Narcotics, your opiates, are very, very addictive. It doesn't take much for a person to start taking the prescription medication, such as your Vicodins and your Oxycontins, to become addicted to them. And that's the sad part about it. And again, it's the situation with the pharmaceuticals. When somebody goes to the doctor and they're having the back pain or the knee pain, the doctor will give them the prescription, and it's usually for 30 days. They may take 2 or 3 or as needed or as prescribed. Sometimes people use it for a couple of days, they're fine, and then it stays on the shelf. What they don't realize is if there's other members of the family that have an addiction problem, they're taking that and they're using it.
Yeah. So do you see, you and your colleagues, see a significant increase, or have you seen a significant increase, particularly because of the economy? That is, more people out of work, more people under stress, young people particularly. So do you see an increased usage of illicit and prescription drugs?
It's actually been pretty steady. What we see from time to time is the increased usage of the heroin coming out of Philadelphia. Some people feel that it's not out here. It is here. It's not in epidemic proportions in the suburban regions, but it is here. People are using it. They're going down, they're picking up, and they're bringing it out. And that concerns us greatly.
Sure.
Any type of narcotic or illicit drug that's out there. So, but we're not seeing spikes in it. But what we do see from time to time with respect to the heroin usage is the crime rate goes up. Property crimes, burglaries has a direct correlation because people in the area that become addicted to that, they need to get that fix on a daily basis. And they will go to any extreme or means to do it. And generally speaking, it's usually a property crime. Well, they will commit the burglary. And this is where the economy is affected because of the price of gold and things of that nature. So they take the jewelry, they sell the jewelry, and they have money for their next hit.
So is there a solution?
I think the solution starts with the prevention with respect to the prescription medications. That's one area that we can definitely control. All right, so if it stops one person from becoming addicted and moving on to the heroin situation, yes. Okay, it has to be tightly controlled. And I know that the Drug Enforcement Administration wants to move towards that way. But what's going to happen will be determined, obviously, by our political people down in Washington on Capitol Hill, because there's a fair amount of lobbying that goes on by the pharmaceuticals. And also with the reps that are out there that visit doctors on a daily basis.
Ultimately, it's the parents who have the responsibility for at least underage children.
There is definitely an education and an awareness that if parents start with their children at a relatively young age and they educate them on that, right there I think the prevention's already started. That's important. They have that dialogue. The dialogue's important. It's the parent that closes their eyes to it or does not want to acknowledge it that it's actually feeding the situation. And that's sad. It's sad because our students and our youth today are our future tomorrow. And we don't want to have a situation where they're addicted to the hard painkillers or the illicit drugs such as the heroin or even cocaine. We see that.
But if they're children, young adults, if they're early users or regular abusers of illicit prescription, they tend to become belligerent and even a physical threat to their parents.
They can from time to time, and that's when you need police and law enforcement intervention in addition with health care. So it's a situation where they may have to go to the crisis unit where they'll go through detoxification and then also they'll have an evaluation then. But again, it doesn't know social or economic boundaries.
Used to.
At one time it did, back in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s.
And I think many of us continue to delude ourselves that it's not our problem.
It's everybody's. You're correct, but it's everybody's.
It's lower income.
Right, it's everybody's problem. And I use a case study that I did when I was in the FBI Academy of a captain from the Chicago Police Department who was a 29-year veteran. He retired from Chicago Police, had to live in the city. Once he did, he still had 2 sons and a daughter, which were relatively young. They were in high school, and he moved out of the city to a suburb because he wanted a better quality of life for his children. What he didn't realize was that the drug situation there was very similar to our area. That the heroin was coming from the inner city out to the suburbs, and his 19-year-old son overdosed on heroin and died. And here's a police captain, a tenured veteran who'd been in the job for 29 years. So my point to everybody is, and I made it in my research, is that it doesn't matter who you are. You have to keep your eyes open to it, and nobody's exempt from this.
I guess one of the most tragic instances is Andy Reid, his family.
Yes.
Terrible.
That's a local story, but it's a very realistic story.
What's the recidivist rate? If young people or older people do go through a detox regimen and they're clean, what's the recidivist rate?
We find if they're successful on the first rehabilitation route and they don't return, it's very good. The problem is when they return back to it once they come out and they don't stay clean, that's going to be the habitual offender that happens. And usually you're looking in this area, it's usually 70 to 80% of the people that do the rehab do well. There's another, 20 to 25 or 30%. Well, they will do the rehabs, or they're in and out of the rehabs,
Right.
like the revolving doors. So that's the situation. But at the end of the day, and it's our experience from what we deal with and what we've seen over the years, is the person has to want that help.
Yes.
You can push all the help you want to that
Yep.
individual. If they don't want to accept it, it doesn't matter what kind of rehab you're putting them in. And again, it comes back to that situation that I referred to before. They're chasing that dragon. They're just trying to get that high. That's all they're worried about. And that's a very sad situation.
Who has rehab centers here? Is it the hospital? Are there standalone rehab centers?
There are both. It's through the hospitals and as well as private institutions.
Are these addiction centers?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have them throughout the region, through Philadelphia and Delaware County and the Montgomery County regions. So you can either go publicly, sometimes you can have public assistance, and there's also the private ones where sometimes they will accept medical insurance, and sometimes you pay as you go.
But if someone goes through a rehab center and then completes the program, goes back to living with his or her parents or whatever, is there a follow-on program of some kind? A continued support, checking in with them, those kinds of things?
Yes, it's very similar to Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes,
they have Narcotics Anonymous.
Right.
They can go to meetings.
Okay.
And they also have meetings, support meetings for the family as well. A lot of times this is driven by the courts, simply because, as I stated earlier, they get into some type of criminal activity,
Yes.
Whether it be driving under the influence, committing a property crime, or a more violent crime, and these rehabilitations are ordered by the court that they go through the drug. Because anytime it looks like there was a situation that spun out of a drug or alcohol-related incident, there is a analysis done by the courts. And then as a result of what that produces, the courts will prescribe if it's court committed,
Yes.
they're required as part of their probation, or it could be an inpatient situation. So a lot of the times that's where we see it coming from, is through the court system.
How hard does our court system, come down on dealers?
Dealers, if they're convicted of possession with the
Yes.
intent to deliver, or
Right.
they're delivering the product, it's an automatic jail sentence. They are incarcerated.
For how long?
Usually for a minum of 2 years, a minimum of 24 months. And they're looking for the
Doesn't
rehabilitation
seem long
on that
enough.
too.
Throw them in and lock them up. Let them rot.
That's a lot of people have that opinion.
Yeah.
But I'm saying it's usually on the minimum of 2 years, and those sentences can go up depending on what type of product they had that they were trying to sell, where they were selling it, and again, if it's in or around a school,
Yes.
it's in that 1,000 feet of a school, it sometimes doubles and triples the penalty. Some people could end up doing 15, 20 years on it.
You know, you've answered the question, but nonetheless, there may be people watching, parents particularly, who are concerned because they know or suspect that their child is involved in drugs. And the chances are pretty good they're at least exposed to them. And then you just hope that the child has enough spine or enough self-respect, discipline, not to get caught up in it. And I heard what you said, and they have heard what you said about watching and being careful and watching for the telltale behaviors. But somehow that's not enough. What else can we do?
We just have to be vigilant about this all the time, and the awareness. And that's the thing that we will do. We've done with the schools. They ask us to come in to speak to the parents, to the upperclassmen,
Yes.
with respect to what it can do. And we have different focuses depending on which audience it is. When we're talking to the students, we really stress that two things that I stress is, one, that it's going to affect your career path. If you're going to college, you definitely want to do something with your life. And also that they're being selfish when they do it, because they're thinking about themselves, not their family, not the people that love them, that want them to succeed in life. That is very sad.
I would love to believe that would work, but kids are kids, and they just
we can't give up.
Invincible and immortal.
Correct.
It's a terrible topic, and I credit you guys with doing everything you can to help parents do their jobs first. Thank you again for being here. Always a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure, Mr.
Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves and watch your kids.